I've learned the hard way that not saying stuff or not voicing your concerns means it builds up internally, and then you start acting out of character. And when you start acting out of character, things can very quickly snowball.
Hardest question coming now. Who is James Warnock?
God, I think James Warnock's changed a lot over the years. If you want to label it, I guess I'm an influencer / entrepreneur / fiance. It was at the point where I didn't care what people thought about me. And in my head, it was like, what is the worst thing that can happen? Is this doesn't work out and I end up in the same place I was before. And so when I started posting and I got traction, I was like, okay, I actually for the first time saw how many opportunities were in social media. And in my eyes, it's the lowest barrier to entry to something to change your life.
I always say you make your own luck. You've got to put yourself in the room.
Everyone's just very scared of failing, but if you fail 20 times and succeed once, that success is all you need. And social media is obviously just designed to trigger your dopamine receptors. When you go viral and when a video succeeds, the dopamine that you get is absolutely ridiculous.
Which creates an addictive element.
Yeah, exactly. And then you end up chasing numbers which you can't control because it's all defined by an algorithm. The influencers are generally quite hated, but I do think there's like a new generation of influencers coming through who are a bit more, like you said, relatable.
James, welcome.
Thanks for having me, John.
Looking forward to this conversation. Hardest question coming now. Who is James Warnock?
God, I think James Warnock's changed a lot over the years, especially the past 4 years. I would say I used to be inherently quite a selfish person. Now it's become a bit more selfless. And I think my girlfriend, or fiance, has been a big part of that.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you very much, sir. In terms of who I am, I think I'm still figuring it out. I think if you want to label it, I guess I'm an influencer / entrepreneur / fiance. I tend to try not to label myself as anything. I just like being me.
Yeah.
Doing good, or trying to at least.
Which makes you authentic and relatable. They're the two words that I'd be sort of mulling in my head and had you in my head before we start talking. That's not often associated with an influencer.
Yeah.
Which makes you think you're uncomfortable with it, which I can tell you are. And yet there are so many people, youngsters particularly, that are aspiring to be an influencer. That's quite a strange dynamic, right?
Yeah. I think the influencing game's changed. I think it used to previously be your like A-list celebrities and then people who are kind of up and coming and living these lifestyles that were always out of reach, like aspirational. And people kind of thrive looking at that. But it's changed now so that people don't want to see that because they hate it. And there's a lot of jealousy behind it. So the new era of influencers are just your normal individuals. There's obviously an element still of like things they're doing which are ridiculous, like brand trips and getting all this gifting and stuff like that. But I think it's definitely evolving towards wanting to follow people who are similar to your life, maybe slightly further ahead, and taking learnings from what they're doing and then applying it to your own life. So I think the influencers are generally quite hated, but I do think there's like a new generation of influencers coming through who are a bit more, like you said, relatable.
Yeah, I like that. So it's a really interesting dynamic for me where being more normal, being more real, which you are, putting out content that's from your heart, that is perhaps your own journey. I saw a lovely post with you and your fiance showing real true love but being amusing as well together, right? And it was just like, and I want to almost it's a bit of an unfair question, but is there a science to that? Because you're just being yourselves. But when I saw the numbers, I couldn't help myself, which is probably part of this whole info, that the likes and the comments were off the scale in context of really good engagement. And it was just people giving you their thoughts, their feedback, which was, love seeing this.
Yeah.
How are you doing that? Because there are so many people that are kind of thinking, well, I do that, but no one's following me or no one's watching me.
I think social media comes in waves. I think at the start, everyone kind of has an arc. So they'll be on a journey. So whether that's trying to gain weight after having an eating disorder or losing a parent and you're going through grief. And so you naturally have quite a lot to speak about at the start, which is what I found, which is why like the initial year or two, content came much more easily to me because you're going through this whole personality change. And then you kind of reach a point where you're just living your life. And for me, if social media wasn't my job, I probably wouldn't have it.
I feel that.
As an app. but I do really enjoy showing certain elements of my life. It's just becoming like I still want to be a relatively private individual while still sharing parts of my life that will help people go through the journey that I went through.
Yes.
There's a lot more behind social media in terms of engagement and how best to like approach certain elements. So obviously everyone talks about having a hook, a storyline, a solution, a problem, all these things. And I think we still have that to an extent, but it's also very easy to see when someone is trying to do certain things for like clickbaiting reasons. And I don't think Alex and I try and do that as much anymore. We just want to show what we're doing as normal individuals because we are just so normal.
Yeah. But it's working.
Yeah.
But I think the key
inadvertently, it still ends up having a positive impact.
Yes. Because there's a lot of work behind that. You mentioned hockey sticks. So and during that time that you were putting out a lot of content and perhaps not getting a lot of traction, was there a pressure off at that point? Because that was almost self-therapy. You were finding yourself, you're allowing yourself to go through your own journey of getting used to putting content out while no one's really watching. Did that pressure become something you're now almost, you said you almost wish you didn't have to do it all the time. Are you with me? Because now it's become a big part of what you do. And I know something we'll talk about that you've looked to move away from that, but it's still a key part of your identity.
Yeah. I think a lot of people like to say that when you first start posting, you should post very frequently. I mean, I've heard numbers up to like 3 or 4 times a day. I've never been like that. I think even at my peak, I mean, there's some periods where if things are happening in your life, like for example, when I got engaged, we post like 3 or 4 videos a week for like 4 weeks because we had a lot to talk about. But most of the time I'm only posting once, twice a week. It's just what works for me.
Sure.
And I think you've got to figure out what works for you. And at the start, if you are scared about people judging you, a lot of people nowadays are just blocking every single person they know on Instagram because they want to take the risk with the social media, but they don't want the judgment from your friends, which is where most of the judgment comes from. I think it depends who you are as an individual. I was at the point where I didn't care what people thought about me, and I had a bit of a fuck it mentality. And in my head, it was like, what is the worst thing that can happen? Is this doesn't work out and I end up in the same place I was before? And so when I started posting and I got traction, I was like, okay, I actually for the first time saw how many opportunities were in social media. And in my eyes, it's the lowest barrier to entry to something to change your life.
So this is quite a contentious question. It's been talked about a lot in my world. It was really relevant to what you just said, which is social media use for youngsters, particularly under 16s, because that low barrier to entry. Right now, there are, I think, over 700,000 grads that have gone to university, got their degree, and they can't get a job. They're on welfare. They feel like they've been missold, if you like, this dream of, get a good qualification and get a good job. The housing market's out of control in terms of how expensive it is to get. And these are all things that are aspirational for youngsters coming through. So now, actually, well, maybe I can be an influencer. Maybe I can be like James.
Yeah.
And that whole thing of taking that away from them, potentially banning it, where do you sit with it? Because you use it as a force for good. Mm-hmm. You are a creator in the true sense of, and maybe that's a better word than influencer, because anyone that is influencing is typically creating, and that potentially could be taken away when, at the ages particularly kids are at, they're in full creativity mode.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very wide conversation to have. I think social media in general, in terms of the ability to scroll and digest so much different information and misinformation, means I would probably put it on the side of being pro banning it up to a certain age. Because when I was growing up, I was I'm obviously Gen Z, so I'm not millennial, so I wasn't outdoors the entire time. Like we had the Xbox
Sure.
and stuff like that. But I do remember getting to a point where I was like, there's more that I should have done when I was younger because I was playing Xbox all the time. Obviously, in retrospect, it's easy to say that, but at the time, all you're thinking about is what my mate's doing. Playing Xbox, therefore I'll be on it. They're on social media, therefore I'll be on it. But I think you learn so much up until the age of kind of like 18. There's no need to rush into social media until then. I do then think that university and the current job system is systemically broken. I think for our parents, where they had a job and then the house price was double what their job salary was, so they could afford it very quickly, made sense because you could afford your life so much more easily. Whereas now, when I was going into my job, the pathway to partner, so I used to be an accountant in like M&A, pathway to partner was like 15 to 20 years. But because the cost of living was so high, you had to sacrifice a substantial amount of your early life to get to that point. Whereas I feel like when my parents were younger, that discrepancy between the cost of living versus what they were earning meant that they could afford to take that extra bit longer because they weren't having to take away from everything else in their life, if that makes sense.
It does.
And I think for me personally, like I started noticing a lot of people around me not taking the normal career path. And that was very inspirational for me because I was like, okay, there's actually so many different ways to make money where I don't have to be at a desk job 9 to 5. That's not saying the desk jobs are bad. I actually think I learned so many transferable skills, which I now use in my
It's similar to
business
the
and stuff like
entrepreneurial
that.
part of you.
Exactly. I don't regret it at all. Like I learned so much, I met some great people, but I do think it's not everyone's path.
No.
It's becoming more and more people's like not path.
No, and I appreciate you sharing like your own personal journey there and the kind of links to Xbox and so on, because young lads right now are in crisis. You know, I've spent a bit of time on this with the Centre for Social Justice, and they produced something called the Lost Boys Report, which just was damning about just the young lads that facing this identity loss, not sure what their lives can aspire to, what they can ultimately be. And one of the key things in there is the lack of a father. I wanted to bring the relationship you had with your father, because that shaping, that molding, that mentoring is so important. And when it's missing, the algorithm seems to be filling it. And of course, that brings in all sorts of, and the algorithm's got a lot to answer there. You know, the negative messaging and so on that's creating, we now know as the manosphere. But just humanizing you from that point of view, the relationship that you had with your father that lives as a legacy now, because I know you talk about him a lot and miss him every day, and almost like kind of what's missing for the youngsters now as role models, which is how I see you.
If I end up being half the man that my dad was, I'll be very happy. He ended up being a quite stay-at-home dad. He had his own business, but he always worked from home. So he just saw me grow up like through everything. He was at every football game. He was there for every key moment in my life. And I think that was just so pivotal. He was kind, respectful, and kind of everything that I wanted to be. Obviously, at the time, you don't see that. You see your parents as being annoying and telling you to do certain things. But I think having him as a role model until 24 when he passed away was incredible. I think it probably impacted my brother more, who was 21 when my dad passed, because I feel like 21, you're in a very transitional stage in your life still. You're still at university, you're about to graduate, you've not really learned or honed all these skills that your dad might teach you. I think because of social media, people have access to so many different male figures, and whether they even meant to or not, they end up falling into these rabbit holes of people who just aren't very good people to look at.
No.
And again, I don't know how they grew up. I don't know their history. There's so many things that can influence it, but it's just, you're so malleable before the ages of, I would say, 22.
Yeah.
Even then past that, obviously you're still malleable, but at that point, you're seeing all these men making a significant amount of money, doing the wrong things. It's just a difficult position to be in.
Yeah. There's a huge amount I can take away from that about the way your dad was fully present. You know, just was with you all the time. And I think a lot of parents are concerned about how they can be more of an influence and just being there. Just actually perhaps less screen time and making more time together is probably a really powerful message to put across. And I called you out as a role model there. Do you embrace that? Do you feel that? Because that's a huge why about why I wanted to meet you and wanted to talk with you. But I feel like there's a lovely humility about you where you're almost awkward with that.
I never really think of myself as a role model. I think I kind of fell into social media, and the narrative that I then ended up taking, people looked up to, which I absolutely love. And I think for me, obviously losing my dad was a big part of my journey, and I wish at the time I'd had someone like myself to look up to and potentially see like how I went through the struggles, what I did to solve it, what I'm now doing, and how, as cliche as it sounds, I like refound my spark after losing it.
It's your purpose.
Yeah, it's my purpose. So yeah, I've never really thought about being a role model, but I guess.
Yeah, I'm very happy to call you that. I think, as a dad to 2 teenage daughters, where you're looking for people that are putting out content that is constructive, educational, and real. That's where I'm saying about that kind of role model piece. The humanizing you, that pressure to produce content and to be building your entrepreneurial career and now engaged and so on. What do you do to pull back? Where do you get that peace? Where do you find that you can reset your mind? And I think that probably brings the fitness part into it as well.
Yeah.
As, I've
I've always been quite good at grounding myself and switching off. I don't really know where that came from, but I'm very busy with everything that goes on. But I get to a point where it might be like 8:30 p.m., 9 p.m., whatever it is, and I just compartmentalize. And I don't know if that compartmentalization's come from actually like when I lost my dad originally and having to compartmentalize that side of my life for a period of time. It's a coping mechanism. And I then do that with work as well, where I'm like, once you've lost someone in the way that I lost my dad, there's not really anything in my life where I'm like, that could possibly be worse. Obviously there could be worse things, but like in my head, that's like the extreme. So I'm like, if I don't reply to this email now, or if I don't like go on a run or whatever it is, it's not the end of the world. Like things could be so much worse. I think once you have that comparison, it makes switching off or having your own like mental space a lot easier. I don't know the psychology behind it, but
no, I get that. I'm going to call a strength out of yours as being vulnerable, like just the way you are in this conversation, and everything I've seen that you put out is vulnerability is a strength. And I want to kind of bring that into the kind of two men having a chat, which actually feels quite normal now. I've always craved it. I want that authenticity. I want to learn from people that are prepared to be vulnerable. But it does feel like that's been a big shift and perhaps wasn't happening certainly 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you sit with that?
I've always worn my heart on my sleeve. I think I've always been an emotional person when it comes to day-to-day feelings, and how I articulate that has definitely changed over the years. I think on the other side of things, I can be quite cold, but again, I think I come back to the compartmentalizing side of things. But in terms of vulnerability, I've learned the hard way that not saying stuff or not voicing your concerns means it builds up internally, and then you start acting out of character. And when you start acting out of character, things can very quickly snowball. So I spoke about it on my socials before, but about a month after I lost my dad, I got arrested for just being drunk and disorderly. And in retrospect, they actually just arrested me purely because I was uncontrollable, because I was so emotional and I was just crying and making a bit of a fuss. I just kind of realised that was because I wasn't talking about anything or getting anything off my chest. At that point, I hadn't actually started social media. And then that was when the whole journey kind of started.
Bottled it up.
Yeah.
And it comes out in the wrong way, like you say.
Well, I think it comes back to what you said earlier about like kind of men growing up, is a lot of us don't feel like we have someone that we can potentially speak to. Like I definitely didn't tell my parents everything growing up. I only really got really, really close to my brother after my dad passed away. And when your friends just inevitably judge you, even if they don't want to. I think as you get older, that definitely changes. But when we're immature, between the ages of 16 to 21, I think that's a more difficult position to be in.
Yeah, and just this conversation gives other people permission to do that. That's the key thing for me, is you're demonstrating again in the way of a role model that's worked for you, and it can work for other people. Mm-hmm. You've clearly built a platform that has allowed you to now have a huge amount of people that engage with you and follow you, but your passion is not being the influencer, if you like, in that. So what are your goals? What do you want to do now?
Good question. I think what I said to you before was I saw what social media was, which is an amazing platform to leverage in different ways. I think at the start it was so that I could quit my job and be self-sufficient through socials. And then it was taking people through my journey. And then you kind of get to a point where you're like, grief is a massive part of my life, but also it doesn't define who I am. And it's not such a big part of my life that it has to be every single piece of content that I do. And then you start kind of doing different things and showing your life. But I think social media as a job by itself is the worst thing you can do. Mentally, just no one should have that amount of reach and feedback constantly from the entire internet.
External validation as well, right?
External validation,
you're defining your happiness, if you like, by the last post and the numbers and the way it's performing, right?
And social media is obviously just designed to trigger your dopamine receptors. And it's so when you go viral and when a video succeeds, the dopamine that you get is absolutely ridiculous.
Which creates an addictive element.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And then you end up chasing numbers which you can't control because it's all defined by an algorithm. And I quickly realized that, and then I got to the point where I was like, okay, I can't do social media full time. I was in a really bad mental state for about 18 months to 2 years. My fiance was very good at grounding me during that period. And then my kind of page started evolving, and I started becoming a bit more like, I knew I wanted to start a business. And then I always say there's two things that make a big difference, which is luck and chance, and then taking them at the same time is like a big reason for why I think I am where I am.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily me searching for it, but something happened. I took the opportunity, and it then like ended up having many different opportunities following it, which kind of took me to where I am.
I like that, because I always say you make your own luck. By that, you've got to put yourself in the room.
Yeah.
You've got to put yourself out there. So you can't do that sat on your sofa at home with headphones on playing a computer game. You've got to be out there, and then you've got to have the vision and the desire to lean in.
And that's the scary thing, is that everyone's just very scared of failing. But if you fail 20 times and succeed once, that success is all you need. Like, I have always been quite happy to fail quite a lot in my life, but as a result, I feel like I've had quite a few successes because of that.
Well, it's the classic, you're testing and learning, and every time you fail, you haven't really failed, you just got closer to success.
Yeah.
How do you define success?
Oh, another good question. If you'd have asked me 5 to 6 years ago, I probably would have said it was money. Obviously, when you're growing up and you're graduating, all everyone's thinking about is, oh, I want that investment banking job, I want to be a lawyer, partner, nice house, all that stuff. And like, I still am money driven, but only to the extent that I can live a comfortable life. And by that, I just mean I can go to a restaurant and buy a meal without thinking about it, or go on a holiday with my family and not really think too much about it. I don't really need the flash cars or like the really fancy watches. I did buy myself a nice watch purely because my dad loved watches and I really wanted one, but like, I'm not going to have a massive watch collection for the sake of it. So now it's really just making sure every day I'm happy with what I'm doing. Obviously that'll fluctuate, but that there's purpose behind it.
Yeah.
And then in my head, the money side of things will just hopefully happen if I'm doing it in the right way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of, I think I have a long-term goal. I'm still 10 years away from that, but we'll get there.
Can you share that?
Yeah. So I have a business right now, which we're working on, which I absolutely love, SAP, and it's growing quite quickly.
What does it do?
So it's a alternative to normal energy gels, which people take when they're running. Me and my business partner are very like whole food based individuals. We met in Cape Town last year and we both turned up to a run with dates and bananas, and we were like, well, something's obviously wrong here. And there's lots of anecdotal evidence that people use maple syrup and salt in like triathlons, ultra trails, that kind of thing. And there are a few brands that already do this, but we broke it down into like 3 pillars, which is performance, is it clean, and is it aesthetic? And all these gels kind of hit 2 of the 3 pillars, whereas there was none that kind of hit all 3. And so we were like, right, let's create this gel in the UK, make the marketing great, and make it accessible to the Gen Pop. Because the issue is that people who are in the sport might have known this was an alternative to gels, but the general population who are trying to get into running have no idea that this way of fueling exists. So it's literally just grade A Canadian maple syrup and Himalayan salt. And what we say is that the best gel is the one you take every time. Because the issue is gels are horrible. They have like 7 or 8 ingredients in them. They cause stomach problems. People don't want to take them, and therefore they don't fuel. If they don't fuel, they don't perform, and therefore they don't want to continue doing it. So this gel basically is like, you want to take it, therefore you'll feel better, and you're more likely to not get injured.
And you've got the perfect, one of your favourite things to do is go running, right? Mm-hmm. So actually you're constantly testing to see how the performance element.
Well, that's when I said
your
before,
own guinea pig.
Yeah, exactly. And when I said before about like just being in the right place and right time, because I was putting myself out there, this for me is what I consider my perfect business, because I'm so passionate about running. It makes a difference to people's lives. Like, it's actually helping them fuel and achieve their goals. Whereas I had a few different business ideas that sounded great on paper, but probably weren't as aligned with me as a person as SAP is.
Yeah, there's nutrition there.
Yeah.
There's kind of biohacking, paralleling the fitness element of the running.
Exactly.
Fit, which gives you the purpose you want.
Yeah.
So the 10-year goal.
Yeah. So obviously, hopefully SAP continues to grow and do well. Myself and my business partner aren't in it for the money. We just love making a difference. Obviously, it's on our mind that maybe in the future we might potentially sell. Hopefully once we sell, I become liquid enough that I have enough cash to become an angel investor. And then I'll use the platform to invest in businesses I believe in. And
I love that.
Yeah.
So you're, in the same way that you've built a platform, I'm going to have to call you that influencer again. It gives you the influence now to actually ripple that out to help others, which I feel that's quite a key thing at your heart. It's everything's a lot bigger than you.
Yeah, definitely. And and there's so many people with brilliant ideas, but a lot of us don't have a trust fund or the capital available to be able to actually start doing it.
Cool.
And
so you'd almost have like an incubator, angel investment, come to me for the advice, the funding.
There's an influencer called Casper Lee, who is one of the OGs in the space. And I think he now has a venture capital firm that invests in startups like that. And I think from what it looks like, he's doing brilliantly well and he's making a big difference. And so that's kind of where I want to place myself in a few years.
I like that.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to younger version? Because you've changed a lot. I mean, it's hard to believe. You said it, that you described yourself as selfish as a younger version of. There's nothing selfish about you now. That change, if you like, to be the person with maturity perspective now. What advice would you give a younger version?
I like to caveat that I do think I still am a bit selfish. I think inherently you kind of have to be sometimes for certain elements of your life, but not in the areas where I was lacking it before. So like with my fiance, with my friends, with my family, and with business. But yeah, the advice is that I feel like it will work itself out. I know that sounds really cliche, but everyone goes through periods where they're like, I am not in the place that I want to be. And we all have that same thing. But in my head, it is, if you have the opportunity to make a difference or change something that won't substantially impact your life. So for example, for me, when I had my corporate job, the worst thing that could potentially happen for me was that I didn't find a job and I had to move home, which I'm very fortunate and privileged about. But that was the worst case scenario for me, was moving back home to Sheffield for a bit because I couldn't afford to live my life in London. Once I thought about that, I was then like, okay, well, now I can afford to take the risks I want to, like start that side hustle, go to this run club and meet new people. And then through doing all these different things, it ends up snowballing. And before you know it, you have a business idea or you've met someone who has a job opening, which you could never even dreamed of. And it's just like taking them steps in the first place is so important. But you need to figure out what you would be happy with in the worst case scenario.
I get that. There's I don't know if you've ever had this conversation on. There's a neurodivergent piece in here, which I feel like, not calling out at all. I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and just there's a relatability to me where it's like managing all the ideas, all the aspirations, the dopamine hits that come with so many different things, and then having to whittle it back to what fills my purpose.
Yeah.
And I've only got a certain amount of time. Have you looked into the neurodivergent side of things?
So I haven't, me and my fiance haven't, we actually spoke about this when we were in Australia in January, because my close friends always joke that I'm autistic, and I've never been self-diagnosed. I don't want to self-diagnose because obviously there's a lot of people that tend to diagnose things that just aren't correct. And I don't know if I am, but when we were going through some of the really niche examples of what it was everything I did growing up. And so there probably is an element of that. And definitely in some social situations, I demonstrate some of the like typical autistic traits.
Yeah.
I don't know if I am. I might get tested at some point, and I don't want to.
It's a bit unfair for me to say that, but it's a friendly conversation where my journey into it was actually Ideas Fest, which is very much the entrepreneurial community. And I was listening to two people having a conversation. Right, I do that. I say this. I'd never thought about it before, but I identified with the high vibration and the hyper focus and the relentlessness when you want to get something achieved. And I think you can relate to that. And then if we sort of bring and probably end on the marathon that you've just done, and the kind of the training and the dedication that you put to everything that you do, it's making sure you channel it to something that fills your cup, if you like.
Yeah, I think I've always been incredibly self-disciplined and incredibly competitive. And when you put them two things together, once you kind of put your mind to something, there's not really much that will stop me unless I get like injured or something happens with like the family or whatever it is. It's just always been what I've been like growing up. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever change. I am very structured. I love having a certain regime. So we're like, say for example, me and Alex went wedding venue shopping last week, and even being out of my routine for like 3 days, going looking at these incredible venues where we're going to get married, which I loved to an extent. Part of me was just like itching to get back to being in a routine.
Yeah.
And so I think things like backpacking, for example, I just can't do it. I'm incapable of enjoying it, and I'm okay with that. But for ages I was like, why am I not enjoying this the way other people are?
I want to finish on something actually, which has been in my brain about you and myself and other people when I'm thinking about it, which is that you've identified that backpacking is not for you, and you have to go through the journey of doing it to go, this isn't for me, and then you sort of form more of a jigsaw puzzle. What do you think you're best at?
In life,
Yeah, just literally, if you were like, the thing I'm the best at is
saying I'm going to do something and doing it. I do tend to set quite audacious goals, and sometimes I miss them, but I will reach them eventually. And even kind of growing up at like university, I said that I was going to do certain things, and even though my career has definitely taken a bit of a tangent, I think I'm parallel, if like not on the same route, but definitely parallel to where I was. And I think it's just because like I dream big, and if I get there, I like great, but if I don't, I've enjoyed the journey.
Yeah, you're a pleasure to talk with. Like the relatability and authenticity is just, it's exactly what I wanted it to be. And you're summing up exactly what you just said when we spoke on the phone about this. And then you said, yeah, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
Straight in the diary. Yeah, and thank you, because I know you're busy. I know you've got a lot going on.
Anytime,
Hope you've enjoyed the conversation.
I have.
So
So
thanks.
conversations.
Pleasure.